Hello all, Ben Shute here once again. I just did a little segment on some thoughts on an orchestral career, and I'd like to follow that up with some thoughts on a career in higher ed teaching. So this is the route that I opted to go um, for various reasons that I'll get into in a minute. Um, to preface all of this, I should just say that there are different, when you're looking at faculty positions in higher education, there are different um, classes of faculty based on their function. You can have an adjunct faculty member who's not full time, but someone who is some schools will call them affiliate artists. They're people who aren't full time at the institution. Very often they have another full time professional career. They'll be with an orchestra or a chamber musician based in that area or a soloist based in that area, but they teach some students at the university. They're an artist who has their own thing, but they're affiliated with the university, and sometimes that's called adjunct faculty. Um, then, of course, you can also have full-time faculty who are receiving a full-time salary from the university, and the bulk of their artistic activity is through the university. Very often, but not always, those positions are tenured or tenure track, and what that means is that you're eligible for promotions through different ranks. So you'll start out as an assistant professor, which doesn't mean a professor's assistant. It's just a rank. It's the starting rank for a tenure track professor. So during that time, you're on um, not academic probation, but your contract is renewed year by year. So it's not a given that it will be renewed the next year. But then you reach a certain point a few years in, sometimes something like 5 years in, and you'll come under review. And if you pass that review, then you are tenured, or it basically means that it makes it harder for you to lose your job. You have to really drop the ball in order to lose a tenured position. At that point, you achieve the rank of associate professor, and then, after a certain number of years of that, you become eligible to apply to become a full professor, and then you come under review again and submit a portfolio, and if that gets approved, then you get promotion to a higher rank, and better salary and all of this sort of thing. So just so that's out there. There are also various types of institutions that one can teach at in higher education. Of course, there are conservatories, which, in terms of performance, are the most prestigious. They don't usually tenure their faculty. Now, there isn't also a great turnover. It's not that people are constantly getting hired and let go, right? So there's usually considerable job security, but you're not tenured. It's not official that your job is safe in that regard. So that's just something to keep in mind. Among universities that have music programs, research universities generally have music programs that function a bit more like conservatories. They're big enough that they can have a intensive performance focus and can feel very much like conservatories. Research universities do tend to tenure their faculty, so that's a difference there. Teaching universities, as opposed to research universities, teaching universities place more emphasis, as it suggests, on the teaching load and the teaching responsibilities. They tend to be smaller, tend to be private universities that can function often more like liberal arts colleges. So again, there are just some classes of things to keep in mind as we approach the whole question of higher ed teaching. Now, the reason I went into this route of higher ed teaching is because I love performing all kinds of things. I love performing solo literature, concertos, recitals, chamber music, orchestral music. I love performing, and I feel that interpreting music is the heart and soul of what I love to do, and that finds its most natural expression in performance. Because of that, I also like to have a bit of time to reflect on the whole process of interpretation. I don't like the prospect of just having to churn out performances night after night, or to just have such a phenomenal amount of repertoire to learn, that I'm overburdened and can't really thoughtfully interpret all of it, and just have to, you can always give your gut reaction and try to make it compelling, but I like to I enjoy trying to go a little bit deeper into the music, and so I thought a university job or conservatory job might afford that kind of opportunity to perform um, while having time to reflect. Um, Also, another outgrowth of that, you know, the interpretation process that I really enjoy is teaching and mentoring young artists, and of course that's the kind of the heart and soul of what a university does, right? I find that very rewarding in its own right, and also just from a performance perspective, it keeps you in shape. If you have students coming in playing a range of different repertoire, you've got to be on top of all of it so that you can demonstrate and share thoughts and help them solve the technical and musical challenges that the repertoire presents and whatnot. So it does keep you sharp as a musician and performer. Um, and then also I liked that it would give you a rootedness in a single location. Um, I didn't want to have to be on the road all the time, as I would, if you had a full time solo career or a chamber ensemble. So I thought that was a benefit as well. So what's the university looking for? I mean, if that's what I was looking for as someone looking for a university job, what might a university job be looking for in their candidates? Um, and it varies tremendously, and that's really something that's very important to keep in mind. You don't want to assume that if you're familiar with a particular university or conservatory, that everything across the board is going to function like that, because it simply won't. Um, so a conservatory or research university is generally going to be looking for an established performer or teacher to teach their particular instrument, and perhaps some chamber music with that. Um, it will probably also involve teaching graduate students. They want you to stay active as a performer, and the teaching load is generally lower in order to enable time for performance activities. A DMA is desirable generally. It certainly can never hurt, but not absolutely essential. And what can carry at least as much weight is having had competition success, an orchestral career, or just a long performance career in general. Um, and just being established in that way can be a credential that speaks even more loudly to many research university search committees than having a DMA. Um, Teaching universities, by contrast, there's, as the name suggests, a higher priority on teaching activities, generally more focused at the undergraduate level. DMA tends to be required for this, or a PhD. Most performance faculty will have DMAs. Unlike the research university model, teaching universities will tend to give a full teaching load, often called a 4-4 or 12 credits per semester. What that means is it's the equivalent of teaching four courses or 4 3-hour courses per semester. And oftentimes the way private lessons are set up is that 1 hour of private lesson teaching counts for 2/3 of what 1 hour of classroom teaching would count as. I mean, that sounds thoroughly confusing, but just so that's on your radar. That's the way a lot of teaching universities will operate. Some want you to remain active as a performer on top of that full-time teaching load. Others seem less interested in that. Some just don't seem to care too much about that. Their priorities are elsewhere. So be aware of that as you're looking at jobs. Just see what the university is looking for, and how that correlates to what your hopes are. Because teaching universities tend to be smaller, the studios tend to be smaller. You're probably not going to have, unless someone has really been a very active recruiter, you're probably not going to have a very full violin studio. At least in many cases you don't. And so faculty who are hired to teach a performance area very often have to do other things as well to fill that load. You might have to teach other music courses, music theory, music history, sometimes courses outside of music. There might be an element of directing ensembles. There can also be an administrative component. So be aware of that. Check the job description of any, really read it carefully if you're considering a job. Research the practices of the university and decide if that job is the kind of thing you're looking for. Something else to keep in mind, if the higher ed route is the route you want to go, have a plan in place for the meanwhile, a bit like an orchestra job, because the difficulty with an orchestra job is it's so hard to win the audition, just because there are so many applicants for a single position, and the audition is so rigorous. The process of interviewing for a university career is a bit less of an audition. Usually you have to play a short recital, like half an hour or something, and then they want to see you teach, and then you talk to a lot of people in an interview. Um, it's less performance rigorous, perhaps, in terms of, every little thing can, any little imperfection sound can count against you and rule you out, in the snap of a finger. Um, the focus tends to be on, a kind of a broader look at your overall qualifications. And again, that's going to depend on what the university is looking for, but very often they're looking for considerable performance experience before you've applied for the job. So you don't want to hang your hat on getting a DMA and thinking, okay, I'm going to have a university job fall in my lap. It usually doesn't work like that. Does sometimes. So by all means try it, but also have a plan in place. What performance activities do you want to be doing, for example, to have some things in place for the meanwhile. What a university committee will usually be looking for in a candidate, they want someone who obviously is very competent, someone who's versatile. The more sorts of musical activities you've done, the more of a plus that is, because you'll be working with students who may have all sorts of different career aspirations. Orchestra playing, chamber music, solo playing, teaching, music education. So it's important for a teacher to be versatile and sensible in different areas of the performance fields. It's good if you have a big picture perspective and can couple that with being very down to earth, both in terms of how you prepare students for very specific career opportunities, and also down to earth just in the sense of being a team player and a very relatable person that your colleagues will enjoy being with. Remember someone who has had a really good career in the music world. Among other things, he was a concertmaster of a major American orchestra, and was saying that the important thing is that you be good enough for your job, but beyond that, a lot of it comes down to how relatable and how winsome you are as a person to be with. Many, if you have two candidates and one does the job well enough and is a great person to be with, and the other person is super brilliant at the job, but is just a really kind of not a nice person to be with, chances are the job's going to go to the person who does the job well enough but is a good colleague. So that's something really important to keep in mind in this field, and really in any field. One final thing that committees are going to be definitely looking for: commitment to recruitment. At basically any institution you look at or interview at, recruitment is going to be something that almost certainly will come up, and it's something that you want to start demonstrating an awareness of from your first cover letter that you send in, because many universities in the States are private, but even state universities depend on student enrollment. Even though they receive subsidy from the state, they also depend on student tuition, to make ends meet. So there's a real emphasis, particularly in America, on going out and finding students and getting students to come to the school, and that is one of the deciding factors for most search committees. So that's something to keep in mind as well when you send your introductory materials and when you go to interview. Recruitment, very, very important. So anyway, I know this is just scratching the surface, but I hope those are a few helpful things to keep in mind, and might give you a sense of whether this is something that you'd be interested in. As always, thanks for watching.